Hi class, we're looking at choosing a methodology key terms, or the key terms from the chapter called Choosing a Methodology. So before we get to them, the sort of setting of this is you're a researcher with a social research question. It burns in you. How are you going to figure out how to answer the question? Okay, if you're in the United States, researchers lean quantitative. They'll push you toward quantitative methodologies. If you're in Europe, they lean qualitative. Just know that. You don't have to do anything with it. We're studying qualitative, so obviously we're leaning qualitative. When you're choosing a methodology, a general approach to research topics, Silverman, the author, includes a suggestion from someone else. He says, and I think this is a really good idea, you make a list of the possible research methods and data source options. You think through why you're accepting or rejecting each one. Just make a little chart. Look at what data sources and methods of data generation are potentially available or even appropriate. So here are some you could possibly choose from. Observation. You could observe people. You could do textual analysis. You could do interviews. You could use transcripts. You could use archival sources. You could use surveys. There's all kinds of stuff you could use. And on your list, you think to yourself, okay, given this is my question, what can these methods or sources tell me? How can they help me answer it? What parts of the social reality I'm interested in might these data sources help me address? Which research questions, if you have more than one, would they help me address? Then, of course, you talk it over with other human beings. We tend to go into these silos with our phones, being trapped in your own head. Well, Silverman doesn't say this, I'm saying this. It's like being a mouse running on a wheel in a cage. No new data comes in. Talk with someone you trust, who has some experience or can point you to someone who can help you figure out your methodology. The first big questions, obvious. Would qualitative or quantitative data better help me answer my question? Or maybe mixed methods, a combination of qual and quant. Do you want to triangulate? These are just big questions to think about. These aren't the answers. Okay, so you've come to qualitative for where your research is going. I'm quizzing you on the next word, epiphanic, because it's so great. Not because, you really need it. It's in the text. Silverman mentions that sometimes qualitative research is just the way you lean or the way you roll. Some students, when they're trying to figure out a method, they just sit waiting for lightning to strike them. Really, in real life, it makes more sense just to follow the logical path. But if you've watched too many movies about intellectuals and you're waiting for a light bulb to explode above your head, you're waiting for a miracle to tell you what to do, you're waiting for what's called an epiphanic shift. That's your key term. It's which means, according to Merriam-Webster, having the character of an epiphany. In other words, you're waiting for an illuminating discovery or realization or disclosure. You might be waiting a long time, is all I'm telling you. Better to just sort of trudge along. In one case, in the textbook, a researcher chose qualitative methods for a specific reason. He wanted to work on problems of homelessness. And qualitative methods like interviews really worked because they bridged the social gap, the social distance. Oops, sorry, wrong thing highlighted. Boop, boop. The social distance. There's a social distance between him as a housed, middle-class person and the desperate poverty of those he was interested in. Interviewing would humanize the interaction where collecting quantitative data just would not do it. Humanity matters in research. Social distance is also used to describe the plague, like when we were avoiding people during COVID-19. But Merriam-Webster defines social distance as the degree of acceptance or rejection of social interaction between individuals, and especially those belonging to different social groups, such as those based on race or ethnicity or class or gender. In his case, it was class. A question that comes up is how far in your methodology you're going to use what's called prior instrumentation. Prior instrumentation. Wow. That's predefined methods and measures. If you're just going to go out in the field without much prior instrumentation, if you go out with a few questions and a notepad and some headings, you're not really focused, but you may come up with really interesting stuff. It's a question, things to consider. So if you're doing research where you're seeking to confirm prior research, you'll need to be more focused. You'll need to use existing methodologies, use prior instrumentation so your data is comparable. If you use considerable prior instrumentation, you can compare it with your work with previous studies, and also your results will be much more focused. However, you're working with a really small sample size for your pilot study, for your project. And if you're working with a really small sample size, you can go to town, you can be wide open, you can be less structured. Of course, we have come up with your own instrumentation, your own list of questions for your interviews, but think about this. But again, there's this issue. If you're not focused, you'll gather superfluous data. It's kind of like, I don't know which one to do. Anyway, moving right along, Silverman asks the question, which I kind of liked. Do we live in what's called an interview society, where interviews seem central to making sense of our lives? I don't know. I just like the question. Idioms, I don't think I'm going to put that one on a quiz. I love the word, and it does appear in the text. Idioms are models. In social science terms, they're models. That's different from the usual meaning of idioms, which is a manner or a style or a dialect. I just love that word. Don't worry about it. Normative. You do need to know what this means. Oh, great. Someone's alarm is going off. Just ignore that if you can hear it. Relating to norms or standards. Usually you can put the word normal in to any sentence where normative appears, and it will mean the same thing. So relating to norms or standards. I choose often to study behavior in situ, which means naturally occurring data. What is that? How do you get that to stop? Naturally occurring data, in situ, that's from Latin. It's things that happen without the prompting of the researcher. And there's a difference between that and what's called research-provoked data, which is things that like interviews or focus groups or surveys. So those are your key terms for this chapter, and I hope you have a blessed and majestic day. Thank you.